Hey guys, tonight we will hear a dramatic story. Tonight's journey takes you deep into the heart of the Middle Ages, into the fragile and hidden world of peasant women who carried the weight of survival on their shoulders. This is what it was like to be a peasant woman. In medieval Europe, a story so real, so vivid, that you will never imagine that this terrible thing could happen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Elena, a 17-year-old peasant girl, living in a tiny village nestled deep within the forests of medieval France not far from the river Loire. The year is 1257, and the air outside your cottage smells of damp earth and burning wood. The first light of dawn is beginning to push through the low clouds, but your day started long before the sun rose. Your hands are already rough and cracked despite your youth. There's no luxury of soft beds or warm blankets here. Your straw mattress scratches your skin, and the single woolen cloak you own smells faintly of smoke from the hearth. You wake not to an alarm, but to the muffled bleating of goats in the small pen outside, and the low, constant drip of rainwater seeping through the thatched roof. Life as a peasant woman is simple on the surface, but underneath it is a daily fight for survival. There is no rest, no true safety, and certainly no comfort. You exist in a world where hunger lurks constantly, where winter nights cut deep into your bones, and where even a small sickness can turn fatal. But tonight, as we follow you through this day, we'll step into every moment, every secret, every small terror, and every quiet victory you cling to in a harsh and fragile world. Your cottage is small, one smoky room shared with your parents, your younger sister Agnes, and your baby brother. The walls are made of wattle and daub patched together with dried mud and straw, and they breathe with every gust of wind. In the dim glow of the hearth's embers, you can see your mother Isabel kneeling over a small wooden bowl, mixing ground barley into dough. She barely looks up as you stir. Her hands are stiff from the chill. Her voice is soft when she speaks, barely above a whisper. Elena, fetch water from the well before the others wake. You slip outside, wrapping your cloak tightly around your shoulders. The cold air bites your cheeks, and the faint mist hangs low above the uneven cobbled path that snakes between the cottages. A few doors creak open nearby, other women. Your neighbors already starting their day, their faces shadowed and pale from exhaustion. Beyond the village boundary, the fields stretch endlessly dark and damp, marked by the toil of many hands. By the time you reach the well, you see a familiar figure, your childhood friend Margot, already hauling up a heavy bucket of water. Her breath curls in the air like smoke, and she gives you a tired smile. Another day, she mutters, glancing back toward the manor house that looms beyond the tree line. The manor, always there, always watching. The lord who owns the land, Señor Raymond, demands his taxes in grain, wool, and labor. It's his steward who counts every bundle and weighs every sack, and his men who ride through the village when debts remain unpaid. You've seen what happens when families cannot meet their dues, animals taken, fields seized, fathers beaten, mothers begging. You remember the winter when the Cerno family lost everything. Their cottage still stands empty, its roof collapsed, a reminder of what happens when you fall behind. The weight of your own family's survival presses against you as you draw up the water. Each drop matters, each loaf, each day endured without collapse. You and Margot walk back slowly together, your buckets swaying your boots, sinking into the damp soil. On the way, you pass Tomas, the blacksmith's son, hammering iron even before the sun has risen. His arms are strong, his tunic blackened with soot, and he nods as you walk past. You pretend not to notice, though Margot smirks quietly beside you. Inside the cottage, the bread is ready, baked quickly on a flat stone near the fire. You eat in silence with your family, one small piece each, no more. Your father Gerard speaks little as he laces his boots, preparing to head to the fields. His back is bent from years of plowing, and the creases in his hands are filled with dirt that no washing can remove. Before leaving, he places a rough, calloused hand on your shoulder and murmurs, "Keep close to your mother today, Elena. The steward will come." Those words chill you more than the morning air. The steward, hard-eyed, cold-faced, carrying a ledger heavier than any sword. When he visits, no one breathes easily. As the hours crawl forward, the sun slowly breaks through the mist, bathing the village in a pale, cold light. Smoke rises from dozens of chimneys, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and boiling cabbage. You can hear distant laughter from the children playing near the church, their bare feet splashing through puddles. For a fleeting moment, there's beauty here. The smell of wild thyme carried on the breeze, the sound of a lark above the warmth of your sister's small hand slipping into yours. But beauty in a peasant's life never lingers. By midday, the manor's riders appear on the horizon, cloaked in dark wool, their horses' hooves thudding heavily against the sodden earth. Your mother stiffens at the sight. Margot grips your arm, whispering, "They've come early this season." And suddenly, the quiet of the morning feels fragile, as though everything could splinter apart with a single word. The riders dismount at the village square, and you watch as the steward unrolls his parchment, his ink-stained fingers tracing lines of debt. A hush falls over the crowd gathering around him. You stand in the back with Margot and Agnes holding your breath. One by one, names are called, families summoned, dues demanded. And though your name has not yet been spoken, you feel the weight of the moment pressing down, knowing that everything you love could vanish with a stroke of his pen. You stand in the cold morning air, your breath shallow, your fingers tightening around the wooden handle of the bucket, still dangling from your hand. The steward's sharp voice slices through the uneasy silence of the square as he calls out the first family's name. Pierre and Isabel of the lower field. Your stomach twists. That's your family. Your mother stiffens beside you, clutching Agnes's hand as she pushes through the crowd toward the steward. Margot squeezes your wrist once before letting go, whispering, "Stay calm." You follow your mother, your legs trembling with each step. The steward's name is Etienne, a tall, lean man with hollow cheeks and sharp, calculating eyes. He wears a heavy wool cloak lined with fur far finer than anything you've ever touched, and he carries a thick ledger bound in dark leather. His boots sink into the damp earth, yet he stands perfectly still like a man carved from stone. "Your tithes are due," Etienne says flatly without greeting. He unrolls a slip of parchment, scanning it briefly before continuing. 2 sacks of barley and 4 hens by the week's end. Your mother's lips tremble, but she forces her voice steady. "We have 1 sack ready, and the hens will be ready to lay again after the next moon. Please, a little more time." Etienne doesn't blink. "Time is not given," he says coldly, scratching something onto his ledger. "If the full dues are not paid, the Lord will seize your grazing rights. You'll have until Sunday. It's Wednesday. 4 days." Your father Gerard, standing behind you, bows his head slightly, saying nothing. He knows better than to argue. Etienne moves on, calling another name, and you step back, your heart pounding so loudly it drowns out the murmurs of the other villagers. Margot leans close to you, whispering beneath the noise, "If your father loses the grazing land, you'll starve this winter." The words sit heavy inside you, but you nod silently because you already know. The tension grows thicker with each name called. Some families nod solemnly, prepared for what's due. Others protest, plead, or bargain, but Etienne's face never changes. Behind him stand two of Seigneur Raymond's men, armed, silent. Their presence makes every refusal meaningless. When the steward finishes, the riders remount, and with a single word they turn back toward the manor hooves, splashing through the muddy path. The crowd exhales quiet, but restless like a tide pulling away. You watch your mother wipe her hands on her apron, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on nothing. But you notice something strange, a figure lingering at the edge of the square. A man leaning against the shadow of the old well, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. It's Henri, the quiet farmhand, who works the fields closest to the manor. He sees you watching and gestures subtly for you to follow. You hesitate for a moment, then glance at Margot, who nods quickly. You slip through the thinning crowd, stepping carefully around puddles until you reach him. Elena Henri says in a low voice, "You need to hear this. The Lord's taxes are rising again next season." Your chest tightens. "How do you know I overheard Etienne speaking with the captain?" He replies, his voice barely audible over the crows circling above the rooftops. "They're raising dues before spring planting. More grain, more hens, and..." He hesitates, glancing around. "An additional Labor Day. For women." You stare at him, trying to make sense of his words. Labor Days are already brutal, long unpaid hours spent bending over the Lord's fields, back-breaking work under watchful eyes. And now they want more. Why would they demand that you whisper? Henri leans closer. The manor's stores are low. They need more wool, more bread, more of everything, because the Lord plans to host a hunting feast in 2 months. For his noble guests, a feast. While your family eats bread so thin, it crumbles between your fingers, they plan to roast whole stags in Raymond's great hall. Margot joins you, shaking her head furiously when Henri repeats the news. "They'll work us until our bones give way," she mutters, her jaw tightening. Before you can respond, a gentle voice interrupts children. You turn to see Brother Mathieu, the village priest, stepping toward you in his worn brown robe. His hair is gray at the temples, his cheeks pale, his eyes steady and calm. He folds his hands before him as he speaks softly. "I saw you speaking with Henri," he says, his voice quiet but firm. "Be careful. Words about the Lord's business can carry to the wrong ears." Henri bristles but lowers his gaze respectfully. "Forgive me, Father. I only thought Elena should know what's coming." Brother Mathieu studies you for a moment, then sighs. "The times are hard, child, but the Lord provides. You and your family must endure. There is no rebellion here, only patience and prayer." You nod, but inside your stomach twists. Patience doesn't feed the hungry. Prayer doesn't stop the steward's cold ink from sealing your family's fate. The priest walks back toward the small stone church at the edge of the village, his figure disappearing into the mist. You watch him go, 1,000 thoughts crowding your mind. That night, after supper, you sit by the dim firelight, Agnes curled against your side, her breath soft and slow as she sleeps. Your father sharpens his sickle in silence while your mother mends the edge of her apron. The cottage is quiet, but the silence is not peaceful. It hums with worry, thick and unspoken. Finally, Gerard speaks without looking up. "We'll need more grain than we can spare. Tomorrow I'll go to Henri's uncle. He owes me a favor. Perhaps he'll lend us a sack." You want to ask what happens if he refuses, but the words catch in your throat. When you finally lay down on the straw mattress, you listen to the soft drip of rainwater outside, mingling with the distant hoot of an owl. You close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come. You think of Etienne's sharp voice of the manor's looming walls of the hunting feast, where nobles will drink from silver goblets, while you and Margot kneel in the fields until your knees ache and your fingers split. You think of the empty cottage down the road, the Cernote family's ruin left as a warning. And as the fire dies low, you make yourself a silent promise you will not let your family fall. But as dawn creeps over the horizon, casting a cold, pale light over the damp fields, a shadow moves among the cottages, the shape of something coming quiet and unstoppable, threading its way into your life without warning. The first pale light of morning spreads across the village like a slow whisper, and you wake to the sound of your father's boots scraping against the wooden floorboards. The air inside the cottage is heavy with smoke from last night's fire mingling with the faint damp smell of earth and wool. You stretch your stiff limbs beneath the rough woolen cloak and rise quietly, careful not to wake Agnes, still curled beneath the blanket, clutching her rag doll. Your mother is already outside, her breath forming small clouds in the chill as she ties a length of twine around a sack of barley. She looks up briefly, and when she hears you step into the doorway, her face shadowed and pale. "Today we go to the manor," she says softly, as though speaking it too loudly would make it worse. The words settle in your chest like a weight. By the time you reach the fields beyond the village, dozens of women are already gathered there, cloaks pulled tightly against the biting wind. The manor's steward, Etienne, stands at the edge of the clearing, his leather ledger strapped beneath his arm, while 3 of the Lord's men linger nearby, swords sheathed, but visible, a silent reminder of who owns the land beneath your feet. Margot is already waiting, arms crossed tightly, her expression set. When she sees you, she steps close, whispering, "They say we'll work until sundown. No breaks, no bread, no water unless the steward allows it." You glance past her at the endless stretch of fields, damp, dark, waiting to swallow hours of your life. Rows of tangled roots cling stubbornly to the soil, and beyond them the manor rises against the pale horizon, a towering shadow of stone and iron. Etienne's sharp voice carries across the clearing. "By order of Seigneur Raymond, all women of the lower fields are bound to labor 3 days this week to repay your tithes. Fail to comply, and your families will answer for it." The words hang cold in the morning air. You lower your head, gripping your wooden rake tightly, as Etienne gestures toward the far side of the field. Together, you and Margot walk through the wet grass boots, sinking deep into the soft earth. The ground is cold beneath your fingers as you kneel, tugging stubborn weeds from the damp soil until your knuckles ache. Hours pass. The sun climbs but gives no warmth, and the breath of winter clings stubbornly to the wind. Your muscles burn, your hands crack, but you do not stop. Around you, the women move silently, their faces set in quiet endurance. The only sounds are the rhythmic pull of roots from earth, the distant call of crows, and the faint metallic clink of the riders' spurs as they circle the field. By midday, Margot leans close, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Look at them," she mutters, nodding toward the Lord's men resting on their horses beneath the shade of an oak, drinking from their wineskins while we kneel in the mud. "Quiet, you," whisper back, glancing around nervously, but it's too late. One of the riders, a broad man with a scar running across his cheek, straightens in his saddle, his eyes locking on Margot. He rides closer, the heavy hooves splashing through the muck, stopping just short of where you kneel. He studies Margot, his lips twisting into something between amusement and warning. "The work is hard," he says, his voice rough, his accent sharp. Maybe I'll ask Etienne to make sure you're doing your share. Margot stares up at him, jaw tight, but says nothing. You feel her trembling beside you, though her gaze never falters. Finally, he spits into the dirt, turning his horse sharply and riding back toward the manor's men. You let out a slow breath, trying to steady your hands, but Margot doesn't move. Her shoulders are tense, her knuckles white around the handle of her rake. When she finally looks at you, her voice is low and ragged. If he touches me, she whispers, I'll kill him. You say nothing because there is nothing you can say. In this world, silence is often the only defense. As the day drags on, the work grows heavier. Your fingernails split, your back aches, and your throat is dry from holding your breath whenever Etienne walks past, scanning the rows like a hawk, hunting for weakness. At one point, he stops directly behind a young woman named Beatrice, who has slowed her pace, her fingers swollen and bleeding. You there, Etienne snaps, his voice sharp as steel. Stand! Beatrice stumbles to her feet, wincing as he seizes her wrist and inspects the dirt beneath her nails. Lazy hands make empty bellies, he says coldly, before shoving her back into the row. Margot mutters under her breath. Vulture. You grip her arm quickly, silencing her before Etienne notices. By the time the sun dips low on the horizon, painting the fields in pale gold, your legs feel like lead. Etienne finally gives the signal to stop, and a few women sink onto the grass, too exhausted to stand. Your palms sting as you wipe them on your skirt, and when you glance down, the cuts across your skin are red and raw. Margot drops beside you, her chest heaving, her lips cracked from thirst. One day down, she whispers bitterly, 2 more to go. But before you can reply, Etienne's voice rises again from the clearing. Tomorrow the manor demands more hands. Those who cannot come will be marked for penalty. Marked. The word sends a chill down your spine. To be marked by the steward is to lose more than coin, it is shame debt and the slow unraveling of your family's fragile place in this village. As the crowd disperses, you notice Henri lingering near the tree line, his hood pulled low against the fading light. He gestures for you to follow his expression, tense. Margot sees him too, but she shakes her head quickly. No, she hisses softly, don't get involved. But something in Henri's eyes makes you pause. When you approach, he speaks in a hurried whisper. Elena, you need to know. Etienne is planning something worse. There's talk of collecting extra dues before the feast. He'll come for your family first. He always goes after those who owe barley. You feel your chest tighten as his words settle like stones inside you. You already owe more than you can give. Why are you telling me this? You ask cautiously. Henri hesitates, glancing over his shoulder. Because I can help you, but you must trust me. There's a way to keep the steward's men from taking what little you have left. Before you can ask what he means, a bell tolls from the church tower, its low, hollow sound rolling over the fields. The day is done. The villagers drift back toward their cottages, shoulders bowed, feet heavy with weariness. But tonight, as you follow your family home, Henri's words linger like shadows. There's a choice waiting on the horizon, one that could save your family or destroy you entirely. And deep inside, you know tomorrow will bring more than just another day of labor. The next morning, the air feels heavier, as though the mist itself carries warning. You wake before dawn again, your body aching from yesterday's labor. But there's no time to rest. Today is the second day at the manor fields, and you sense that something is changing. A quiet shift, a tremor running beneath the fragile stillness of the village. Your mother is silent as she ties her shawl, her fingers trembling slightly, as she fastens the knot. Gerard is already outside, sharpening his sickle, his brow furrowed deeper than usual. He doesn't speak, but his silence says more than words. He's worried too. On the path toward the fields, you meet Margot. Her face is pale, her jaw tight, but there's fire in her eyes. "Henri came to me last night," she whispers, pulling you aside as the other women pass. "He told me something about the steward, about what's coming." You nod. "He spoke to me too." Margot grips your arm, her voice sharp. "Elena, this isn't just about tithes anymore. Etienne wants control. He means to squeeze the village until we break." Before you can reply, the bell from the church tower tolls softly across the misty fields, calling the women to gather. Etienne stands waiting, ledger tucked beneath his arm, 2 armored riders flanking him. He looks colder than ever today, his gray cloak snapping lightly in the wind. When the crowd has formed, he unrolls a scroll and speaks without greeting. "By the order of Seigneur Raymond, an additional due will be collected before the month's end. 1 sack of barley from every household. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of land." Gasps ripple through the crowd. Whispers rise like the buzzing of trapped bees. You feel Margot stiffen beside you, her nails digging into her palms. A man behind you curses under his breath, and his wife quickly hushes him, glancing at the steward's riders. Someone dares to speak up. "We gave you everything last season." An older woman cries, her voice breaking. "We've no grain left to give." Etienne's gaze settles on her with icy precision. "Then you will give your labor instead." Margot's breath hitches sharply, but she steps forward before you can stop her. "You take from us until we bleed," she says, her voice trembling, but loud enough for all to hear. "Does your Lord know how we live while he feasts in his hall? Does he care?" The silence that follows is thick and dangerous. Etienne tilts his head slightly, studying her like a wolf, deciding whether to strike. Then slowly he smiles, but there's no warmth in it. "Careful girl," he says softly, almost kindly, though his tone carries a razor's edge. "Words can cost more than barley." Margot doesn't move, but you can see the flush rising in her cheeks, her shoulders tight with contained fury. You grab her wrist and tug her back, whispering urgently, "Stop, please." Etienne watches the two of you for a long, cold moment, then turns sharply and continues down the line, calling out names and marking debts in his ledger. But the air feels different now, tense, buzzing, fragile. One wrong word could shatter everything. When the crowd disperses, you and Margot linger at the edge of the square. Henri finds you there, slipping between the villagers like a shadow, his hood drawn low. He speaks quickly, his voice hushed. "I've been to the mill," he says. "I heard the Lord's men talking. There's grain hidden in the old storage barn behind the manor. It's not theirs, Elena. It's ours. Taken from families last winter when they couldn't pay." You stare at him, confused. "What are you saying?" Henri glances around before leaning closer. "I know a way in. There's a broken board near the back wall. If we take what's ours before Etienne counts it, we can survive the season." Margot's eyes widen. "Are you mad? That's theft." Henri's jaw tightens. "It's not theft when they stole it first." You glance between them, your chest tight with fear. The risk is unthinkable. If Etienne caught you anywhere near the manor stores, there would be no mercy. The steward's punishment for theft is brutal and swift public shame at best, the stocks, or worse at worst. But the image of your empty sacks at home lingers in your mind. The thought of your mother begging for scraps, of Agnes thin and pale, coughing through winter nights. You open your mouth to speak, but before you can, a deep, steady voice interrupts. Enough. Brother Mathieu steps into the small circle, his robe damp from the wet grass. His lined face is stern, but not unkind, his gray eyes sharp beneath his hood. Henri stops filling these children's heads with dangerous ideas. Henri turns to face him, frustration etched in every line of his jaw. You speak of patience, father, but patience does not fill bellies. Brother Mathieu folds his arms, and rebellion fills graves. The silence stretches tight between them. Finally, the priest sighs, lowering his voice. I will speak with Etienne. Perhaps I can persuade him to grant some leniency. Margot scoffs softly. Persuade Etienne. You'd have better luck teaching the crows to pray. Brother Mathieu ignores her and turns to you, his expression gentler now. Elena, listen to me. Do nothing rash. Trust that there are ways to survive without losing yourself. You nod faintly, but his words feel hollow. Survival here is not given, it is taken, scraped together, clawed from the earth. And sometimes it demands risks you never imagined yourself capable of. By late afternoon, the women return to the manor fields for another long day of labor. Your muscles scream with every movement, your palms raw and stinging. But you work silently beside Margot, neither of you speaking of Henri's plan again. Not yet. The sun sinks, lower shadows stretching across the rows as the riders patrol lazily along the edge of the fields. You keep your head down, avoiding their gaze, but every so often you catch Etienne watching from the manor gates, his pale face unreadable. By the time you stumble back to the cottage at dusk, the ache in your bones has spread to your very breath. Your family eats in silence a thin stew of cabbage and water, while outside the last light fades from the sky. But as you lie on your straw mattress that night, staring into the dark, Henri's voice returns to you soft and urgent. There's a way in. You close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come. Night settles over the village like a heavy cloak, quiet, except for the faint rustle of wind through the bare branches and the distant, uneven hoot of an owl. The last embers of your family's hearth glow faintly, casting warm shadows against the mud-packed walls, but you do not sleep. Henri's words from earlier echo in your mind. There's a way in. When Gerard's snores finally deepen and Agnes curls closer into her blanket, you rise silently, pulling on your rough wool cloak. You step carefully over the uneven boards of the cottage floor, avoiding the one that creaks, and slip outside into the cool darkness. The air smells of damp soil and wood smoke. A thin mist clings low to the ground, curling around your boots as you walk toward the edge of the fields, where Henri waits beneath a crooked willow. His hood is pulled low, his arms crossed tightly as he scans the shadows for movement. You came, he whispers when you approach his breath, visible in the cold air. You nod, drawing your cloak tighter. Tell me everything. Henri glances over his shoulder, lowering his voice. Behind the manor, past the stables, there's an old storage barn. Half of it collapsed in the last storm, and the guards hardly watch it anymore. Inside, there are sacks of barley rye and oats grain taken from the village last winter, enough to feed 10 families through the season. Your chest tightens as he speaks. You picture your mother's thin hands kneading the last crumbs of barley into dough, Agnes pushing her bowl away because her stomach still growls when it's empty. Your father coughing from exhaustion, but refusing to rest because the debts never end. But Henri's words are dangerous, and the silence of the night feels sharper now, as if listening. If we're caught, you begin. He shakes his head. I've watched the riders. After dark, only 2 patrol the manor grounds. If we move quickly, we can take what we need and vanish before they even know. You hesitate, your hands trembling beneath your cloak. Henri, this isn't just stealing. This is defying Etienne. Henri meets your gaze steadily. Etienne isn't the law, Elena. He's just a man fattening the Lord's table while our people starve. Before you can respond, a twig snaps behind you. You spin heart-pounding only to see Margot emerging from the shadows, her expression stormy. So it's true, she says, stepping closer, her voice low and tense. You're planning this without me. You glance at Henri, then back at her. I didn't want to put you in danger. Margot scoffs, softly folding her arms. Danger. Elena, we live in danger. We kneel in mud, starve through winters, and break our backs while Raymond and his steward drink wine from silver cups. She pauses, her voice lowering. If you do this, I'm coming too. Henri looks uneasy, but doesn't refuse her. Fine, he says at last. But we move in silence. No one else knows. Before you can reply, the sound of hooves breaks through the quiet, slow, deliberate drawing closer from the direction of the manor. Henri pulls you both into the shadows beneath the willow's hanging branches, his hand gripping yours tightly. A lone rider passes by on the narrow path, torchlight flickering against the damp air. It's the scarred man from the fields, the one who threatened Margot. His head turns slightly, and for a moment you fear he sees you hidden among the branches. But he rides on the sound of his horse fading into the distance. When you finally step out of the shadows, Margot exhales sharply. That one, she mutters. He watches me like a wolf waiting to bite. Henri nods grimly. His name's Arnaud, one of Etienne's closest men. You need to be careful around him. You return to your cottage without another word, your heartbeat still uneven as you slip back inside. Agnes stirs briefly in her sleep, murmuring softly, but doesn't wake. You lie on the straw mattress, staring into the dark, knowing there's no escaping what's coming. The next morning, the riders return, not to collect tithes this time, but to watch. Etienne stands in the square, pale and precise as ever, flanked by Arnaud and another guard. His gaze sweeps over the villagers like a blade. By Seigneur Raymond's decree, he announces all field work resumes until the feast is supplied. Those who fail to appear for labor will face penalties. The word penalties hangs like smoke in the air. You bend your head, clutching Agnes's hand tightly, but Margot doesn't bow. Her shoulders are stiff, her jaw set, her eyes locked on Etienne with quiet defiance. Arnaud notices. His lips curl into a small, sharp smile as he leans close to Etienne, whispering something you can't hear. Etienne doesn't reply, but his cold gaze lingers on Margot a moment longer than it should. When the gathering breaks apart, Brother Mathieu calls you aside, his face pale beneath his hood. He grips the small leather-bound Bible he carries, but his hand trembles slightly. Elena, he says softly, his voice low so others can't hear. I've seen the manor's records. You blink at him, startled. How? He glances toward the riders, lowering his voice further. Etienne keeps copies at the chapel, the tithes, the grain, the dues collected from every family. I looked last night. Your breath catches as his words sharpen. The Lord's stores are overflowing, he says bitterly. Etienne's been taking double from the poorest families and lying about it. Margot steps forward, her voice fierce. Then everyone must know, Brother Mathieu raises a hand, quickly silencing her. If Etienne learns I've seen those records, he'll accuse me of theft. And worse, he'll make an example of anyone who spreads it. You must not speak of this. The weight of his revelation presses hard against your ribs. Everything you feared is true, the shortages, the constant hunger, the endless demands. It's not just chance or misfortune, it's deliberate. Margot clenches her fists, anger flashing in her eyes. Then we take back what he stole. You glance at her, then at Henri's distant figure, standing near the tree line, his hood drawn low, his jaw set in quiet determination. For the first time, you realize the threads of your life. Margot's temper, Henri's plan, brother Mathieu's secrets are tangled together, now knotted into something larger than you can control. The choice isn't distant anymore. It's here, pressing against you, whispering for action. And deep down, as the cold wind carries the church bell's slow toll across the fields, you understand one thing. Whatever happens next, nothing in this village will remain the same. The wind howls low through the valley that night, rattling the shutters of your small cottage and carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from distant fires. Sleep escapes you again. You lie awake on the straw mattress, the voices of the past few days looping endlessly in your mind. Henri's urgent whispers, Brother Mathieu's warnings, Margot's defiance, and Etienne's cold decree. When the church bell tolls softly in the distance, its hollow sound rolling across the sleeping village, you slip quietly from your blanket, wrapping your cloak around your shoulders. Outside, the night is thick with fog clinging to the earth like a secret. Henri waits beneath the gnarled oak at the edge of the path, his hood drawn low, his breath curling white in the cold. Margot is already there, arms crossed tightly against her chest, her expression sharp. When you approach, Henri speaks quickly, wasting no time. Tomorrow after nightfall, he whispers, "We make our move." Your chest tightens as the words sink in. Tomorrow, he nods. There's no choice. Etienne's riders leave for the market at dawn to sell grain in Angers. That night, only one patrol remains on the southern wall. It's our only chance. Margot leans forward, her voice tense. And the barn. You're certain we can get inside? Henri's jaw sets. I checked again today. One board in the back is loose enough to pry open. But we must move fast. If we're seen, you don't need him to finish. You've seen what happens to thieves. Before you can respond, the soft rhythm of approaching footsteps makes all three of you freeze. From the shadows beyond the oak, a shape emerges, Arnaud, the scarred rider, his torchlight cutting sharp edges into the mist. Well, well, he drawls, stopping just short of you. His voice is low, but it drips with satisfaction. Out for a stroll, are we? Henri stiffens, subtly stepping between you and the rider. We're discussing tomorrow's field work, he says evenly. Arnaud smirks, leaning slightly in his saddle. At night, strange hours for such innocent talk. Margot's fists clench, but she says nothing. You can feel the heat radiating off her anger coiled tightly beneath her silence. Arnaud notices it, and his smirk deepens. You, he says, pointing at her with the tip of his riding crop. You've got a sharp tongue for a peasant girl. You'd do well to keep it still, or Etienne might decide to cut it out for you. Margot lifts her chin defiantly, her voice sharp as a blade. Better to lose my tongue than my dignity. The words slip into the night like sparks into dry grass. You hear Henri's sharp inhale, see Arnaud's expression shift, no longer amused. His horse paws the ground as he leans forward, his scar catching the torchlight like a jagged mark of warning. Careful, he says softly, his voice dangerous now. Careful, little bird. Henri steps forward, his stance solid, his voice low but steady. She's said enough. Let her be. For a moment, silence grips the night taut and brittle as spun glass. Then Arnaud exhales sharply through his nose, pulling on his reins. You peasants never learn, he mutters before turning his horse sharply, the torchlight retreating with him into the fog. You remain frozen until the sound of hooves fades completely. Margot exhales, shaking her anger vibrating through every movement. Henri grips her shoulders, steadying her. He suspects nothing he says more to convince himself than her. But you know better. Arnaud saw too much, and that makes tomorrow even more dangerous. The next day, the entire village gathers at the square summoned by Etienne's sudden orders. The steward stands rigid at the center, his fur-lined cloak resting perfectly across his shoulders, his pale face betraying nothing. Supplies for Seigneur Raymond's feast are short, he announces sharply, his voice slicing through the murmurs. Every household will deliver what remains by tomorrow morning. Any delay will not be forgiven. Beside him, Arnaud stands tall, his sharp gaze sweeping across the crowd. When his eyes land on Margot, his lips twitch ever so slightly, not a smile but a promise. Your stomach sinks. After the gathering disperses, Brother Mathieu intercepts you near the chapel, his face pale, his steps hurried. He pulls you into the shadow of the old stone wall, lowering his voice. Elena. I must speak quickly, he says, his tone urgent. Last night I went deeper into the records. There's something worse than I thought. You blink, unsettled by the tremor in his voice. What did you find? His gray eyes flick toward the manor before returning to you. Etienne isn't just stealing grain. He's diverting coin meant for the bishopric offerings, tithes, all of it. If the church discovers this, they'll demand repayment, and Raymond will take it from us. The village will be stripped bare. Your breath catches. Can't you tell someone higher in the church? Mathieu hesitates, his jaw tightening. I've tried. No one listens. Etienne's ties run deeper than I knew. If he suspects I've seen these records, he trails off, his gaze hardening. Be careful, and keep your family close. Before you can ask, more voices rise nearby as Arnaud shouts at a young boy for spilling water on his boots. The boy scrambles away, tears streaking his cheeks, and Arnaud's sharp laughter cuts through the air. Margot sees it too, and her jaw clenches again, but you grab her wrist, quickly, shaking your head. Not now, you whisper. Not here. She exhales slowly, forcing herself to stay still. That night, as darkness blankets the fields, you sit at the edge of your bed, the flickering glow of the dying fire washing the cottage walls in muted gold. Gerard and Isabel sleep, their breathing slow and steady while Agnes murmurs softly in dreams. Outside, a lone owl calls from the woods, its haunting note stretching into the quiet. You tighten your cloak around you and slip outside once more. Henri waits beneath the willow as he promised. It's settled, he says as soon as you reach him. Tomorrow night. We'll meet after the riders pass the northern gate. There's no turning back. Margot steps from the shadows beside him, arms crossed, but silent this time. You glance at her, then at Henri, feeling the weight of the moment press heavy on your chest. No turning back, you repeat softly, the words tasting strange on your tongue. And yet somewhere deep inside a voice whispers that you are standing on the edge of something irreversible, a single choice that will change everything you know. The night is black and still, the kind of silence that feels alive as though the earth itself is holding its breath. Clouds hide the pale glow of the moon, leaving the village drowned in darkness, broken only by the faint orange embers glowing in the distant chimneys. You stand beneath the crooked willow, where Henri waits the damp grass cold beneath your boots. Margot is already there, her jaw set, her hood pulled low. No one speaks, words feel too heavy, too loud for this fragile moment. Henri finally breaks the silence, his voice no louder than a whisper. The riders passed the northern gate. This is our chance. You nod, your heart pounding so hard you can feel it in your fingertips. Together, the three of you follow the narrow deer path leading toward the manor, staying close to the tree line, where the shadows run deepest. The damp leaves crunch softly beneath your feet, and each sound seems sharper in the still air, the hoot of an owl, the distant bark of a dog, the faint rustle of wind across the fields. As you near the edge of the manor grounds, the towering stone walls rise before you, gray and cold, against the faint starlight. Beyond them you can hear muffled laughter and music drifting faintly from the great hall, where Seigneur Raymond and his guests feast on roasted boar and honeyed wine. The contrast between their world and yours burns like salt against raw skin. Henri leads you toward the farthest corner of the wall, where an old wooden storage barn leans crookedly against the outer fence. Its roof is half collapsed and the boards are splintered, forgotten beneath the shadow of the manor. This is the place he promised. Margot kneels first, running her fingers along the warped planks, until she finds it, the loose board at the base hidden beneath overgrown weeds. Henri crouches beside her, prying it open carefully, until there's just enough space for one of you to crawl through. You first, he whispers to you. You hesitate, heart hammering, before slipping inside. The air smells of dust and grain, heavy and dry, and the darkness swallows you whole until your eyes slowly adjust. You can make out stacks of burlap sacks piled high against the walls, tied neatly and marked with chalk symbols. Margot follows silent as a shadow, and Henri slides in last, replacing the board behind him. For a moment, the three of you just kneel there in the dimness, listening to the pounding of your own hearts. Then Henri moves quickly, untying one of the smaller sacks and passing it to you. It's heavier than you expect, the rough fibers scraping your palms. You pass it carefully to Margot, who sets it near the opening. One each, Henri whispers. No more. If too many go missing, Etienne will notice immediately. You nod, though every instinct screams to take more. The thought of Agnes shivering beneath her blanket, of your mother measuring crumbs, makes restraint feel impossible. But Henri is right. If they suspect theft, the entire village will pay. You're just reaching for the last sack, when the faint crunch of boots outside freezes you in place. Margot stiffens, eyes wide. Henri presses a finger to his lips, his other hand already gripping the loose board, holding it shut. The sound grows louder, steady, deliberate, too close to be chance. Through the tiny gap between the planks, you see the flicker of torchlight. It's Arnaud. The scarred rider walks slowly along the outer wall, his torch held low, scanning the shadows with predator's eyes. His horse snorts softly behind him, hooves sinking into the damp earth. You can barely breathe. One wrong sound, one cough, one creak of the board beneath your knee, and it's over. Arnaud pauses directly in front of the barn. You watch as his torchlight spills through the cracks in the wood, painting thin stripes of gold across the floor. He stands motionless for what feels like an eternity, head tilted, as though listening for something. Margot's hand trembles where it grips yours, her breath shallow and ragged. Henri doesn't move, not even to blink. Then finally, Arnaud exhales softly, muttering something under his breath, and turns away. His boots crunch against the soil, his torchlight fading as he heads toward the stables. Only when the silence returns does Henri let out a shaky breath. That was too close, he whispers hoarsely. We're leaving. Now. You push the sacks carefully through the gap, sliding out one by one into the cool night air. The wind has shifted, carrying the faint sound of music and laughter from the manor, distant and mocking. Henri reseals the board, and hoists one sack onto his shoulder. Margot carries another, and you grip yours tightly as the three of you move quickly across the open grass, your boots silent on the damp earth. But before you reach the trees, a voice cuts through the night. Who goes there? You freeze your blood, turning to ice. From the shadow of the stables, a second rider emerges, his spear angled low. Unlike Arnaud, this man's armor glints faintly beneath the torchlight, and his pace quickens when he sees the shapes moving in the dark. Rune Henri breathes. You sprint, the sack heavy against your chest, your breath burning your lungs. The rider shouts again, the pounding of hooves erupting behind you. Margot grabs your arm, dragging you toward the thicker shadows where the forest begins. Branches whip against your cloak, catching your skin, but you don't dare slow. The rider's torchlight flashes briefly through the trees too close before it vanishes entirely into the deeper dark. You collapse against a mossy trunk, clutching the sack to your chest, your heart racing like a wild drum. Henri crouches nearby, his chest, heaving, his expression grim but steady. "We made it," he whispers, his voice ragged. "We have to hide these with the others. No one must know." Margot leans against the tree, her breathing harsh, her eyes bright with anger and fear. "That was only one rider," she whispers sharply. "If Arnaud had doubled back." But she doesn't finish the thought. None of you want to imagine what might have happened. Meanwhile, back at the chapel, Brother Mathieu kneels in the flickering candlelight, his hands folded tightly over the wooden pew. But he isn't praying. He's hiding a sealed parchment beneath the altar, the copied records he found in Etienne's ledger, proof of his theft. The door creaks open behind him, and he turns to see Etienne standing in the doorway, his sharp silhouette framed by firelight from the torches outside. "You've been busy," Father Etienne says quietly, stepping forward. "I trust your loyalty remains to the proper authority." Brother Mathieu forces his voice steady. "My loyalty is to God." Etienne's lips curl faintly. "Then pray for your villagers, Father. Winter will be unforgiving." As Etienne leaves his boots clicking softly against the stone floor, Mathieu's breath trembles. He knows the steward suspects something, and he knows too that time is running out. That night, as you creep back into the cottage and lay the sack of grain beneath the loose floorboard, you realize there's no turning back. The risk is no longer a distant thought. It's here, breathing down your neck. The manor will notice what's missing. And when they do, Etienne will come for answers. Morning comes gray and silent, the mist heavy over the damp fields. But before the first firewood is split, before bread meets the stone, the alarm spreads through the village like a cold wind. They've found the missing grain. You hear it first from Thomas, the blacksmith's son, as he hammers at a bent horseshoe near the well. His usually steady hands shake slightly as he speaks. One of the riders went to the barn at dawn. The sacks are gone. Your throat tightens. For a moment, you're convinced everyone can hear your heart pounding, that they must see the guilt written plainly on your face. Before you can respond, the sound of hooves interrupts the low murmur of the square. Etienne rides in at the head of 3 armed guards, his dark wool cloak flowing behind him. Behind him, Arnaud's scar glints in the pale light, as his gaze sweeps slowly across the villagers gathered there. "Everyone to the square," Etienne's voice cuts through the quiet like steel. "Now." Mothers pull children close. Men set down tools and gather slowly, their faces pale and wary. You move with them, your hands clammy beneath your cloak, each step toward the center, heavier than the last. Etienne waits there, the manor guards fanned behind him, their swords resting casually at their sides, but ready, always ready. When the crowd stills, he speaks with quiet precision, his voice cold as frost. Last night, he says the Lord's stores were violated. Grain was taken stolen from Seigneur Raymond's hand. This is treason. The word cuts sharp and deep. You see the villagers shift uneasily, exchanging fearful glances. Some gasp softly, others clutch at their children, as though expecting punishment to fall immediately. Etienne's pale eyes scan the crowd, unblinking, calculating. I will have the names. He says, his voice lower now, more dangerous for its quiet. Whoever is responsible will step forward. No one moves. The silence stretches long, a taut thread ready to snap. You stand near Margot, your fingers digging into the folds of your skirt, willing your body to stay still. Etienne's gaze lands briefly on you, then lingers on Margot. That's when Arnaud steps forward, his boots crunching softly against the damp earth. His voice carries rough and deliberate. Perhaps he says we should start with those who have loose tongues. You feel Margot stiffen beside you, her shoulders tightening, her chin lifting almost instinctively. Etienne tilts his head slightly, studying her with faint interest. Do you have something to confess, girl? Margot's jaw locks, but she doesn't answer. The silence around her sharpens like a blade. Arnaud steps closer, his scar catching the light, his smirk widening just slightly. I've heard whispers from this one, he says, motioning toward her with his gloved hand. Questions about the Lord's stores. Dissatisfaction. Perhaps even resentment. Margot's lips part, but you grip her wrist hard, grounding her silently, begging her not to speak. One word, one sharp retort, and Arnaud will have what he wants. Etienne watches her closely, his pale fingers tapping lightly against the cover of his leather ledger. Finally, he exhales softly and looks away. Very well, he says, his tone smooth but cold. If the guilty will not speak, then the innocent will bear the burden. He gestures sharply to the guards. Double the dues. Another day's labor from every household. Perhaps hunger will loosen tongues. Gasps ripple through the crowd, low and helpless. Your stomach sinks. That means less food, more work, more punishment for everyone. Margot exhales sharply, muttering beneath her breath, vulture. Unfortunately, Arnaud hears her. His head snaps toward her like a wolf catching the scent of prey. He takes a slow step forward, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. But before he can speak, Brother Mathieu steps out from the front of the chapel, his robe trailing softly against the damp stone path. His voice is calm but carries with quiet authority. This will destroy them, he says evenly, looking directly at Etienne. These people cannot give what they do not have. Etienne doesn't turn his head. They have hands, Father. Let them work. Brother Mathieu's jaw tightens, but his tone remains steady. You know as well as I do that Seigneur Raymond's stores are overflowing. The ledgers prove he stops himself mid-sentence too late. The words hang between them like a drop of ink on fresh parchment. Etienne's eyes finally shift toward him, sharp and cold as winter steel. The ledgers Etienne repeats softly, dangerously. How curious that you would speak of them. A ripple passes through the crowd. Brother Mathieu folds his hands in front of him, his expression carefully neutral, but you see the faint tremor in his shoulders. Be careful, Father Etienne says softly, stepping closer now, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Your loyalty is being watched. For a moment, silence grips the square. Then Etienne turns sharply, mounting his horse with fluid precision. Return to your homes, he commands. We'll have our answers soon. The riders turn their hooves thudding heavily against the path as they disappear into the mist beyond the square. The crowd scatters slowly, whispers weaving through the silence, carrying fragments of fear, treason, punishment. Arnaud saw her. They'll blame us all. You walk back with Margot, her steps quick and restless. She pulls her hood low but doesn't speak until you reach the path leading to the well. He's watching me, she hisses, her voice low but fierce. Arnaud. He's waiting for me to slip. You grip her arm tightly. Then don't. Say nothing. Do nothing. Her jaw tightens. I can't stay silent forever. Henri joins you a few steps later, his hood damp from the mist. His voice is low controlled. We hide the grain deeper tonight, he says. Etienne's men will search the cottages before the week's end. You nod faintly, your stomach twisting. The sack beneath your floorboard suddenly feels heavier than ever, like a stone tied to your throat. That night, as you help your mother mend a tear in Agnes's cloak, you glance out the small window and see torchlight moving slowly along the ridge above the fields. The riders are hunting patient and silent, and deep inside you know it's only a matter of time before they come knocking at your door. The mist clings to the fields the next morning, pale and cold, but the air carries a new weight, the weight of footsteps, voices, and fear. From the window of your cottage, you watch as Etienne's riders move slowly along the muddy path, torches flaring in the gray dawn, their boots grinding deep into the earth. The first cottage they enter belongs to Beatrice's family. You hear the muffled cries as they overturn benches and scatter baskets, their armored hands ripping apart bundles of straw in search of hidden sacks. Her youngest son wails when they toss his wooden toy into the mud, and still the riders do not stop. By the time they leave, Beatrice stands in the doorway, clutching her children, her face pale, her lips trembling. They found nothing there, but the warning is clear: no door, no family, no memory of dignity is safe. You retreat from the window, pressing your back against the cool wall. Beside you, your mother Isabel sets down her mending and smooths the front of her apron with shaking hands. They'll come here, she whispers. They'll come to us. Gerard looks up from sharpening his sickle, his jaw tight. Let them come, he mutters, but there's no fire in his voice, only exhaustion. Your gaze drifts toward the loose floorboard beneath the bed where you hid the sack. Your chest tightens. If they find it, there will be no mercy. Later that morning, you meet Henri and Margot near the old well, the air damp with fog and whispers. Henri's hood is pulled low, his jaw set with quiet urgency. They've searched 5 cottages already, he says, his voice low. They're coming this way by nightfall. Margot folds her arms tightly across her chest. Then we move the grain tonight. But Henri shakes his head. No. They'll be expecting that. We move it now while their eyes are on the far side of the village. You glance toward the path leading to your home, your heart pounding, and hide it where Henri looks toward the woods beyond the grazing fields. There's an old charcoal pit near the riverbank. My father used it years ago. No one goes there anymore. Margot frowns, her voice sharp with worry. It's too far, Henri. What if we're seen, then we'll be seen working, he replies firmly. Gathering firewood, fetching water, whatever we must pretend. But if the grain stays where it is, Etienne's men will find it. It's only a matter of time. You nod slowly, feeling the weight of his words press deeper into your chest. By midday, the manor riders move closer. The sound of hooves carries from the far side of the square, echoing against the stone walls of the small chapel. You pull your hood low and try to keep your hands steady as you kneel in the garden beside your mother, cutting small bundles of time, pretending that life is untouched. But you hear it. Arnaud's voice, sharp and cruel, drifting across the square as he calls to someone. You there, girl. You look up just in time to see him step into Margot's path, blocking her way with the weight of his armored frame. He tips his head, the faintest mocking smile curling at his lips. Such fire in you, he says softly, so only those nearby can hear. The steward wonders if perhaps your loyalty to Seigneur Raymond is divided. Margot stiffens, her jaw locked tight, but says nothing. Arnaud steps closer, his shadow falling over her, his voice like silk hiding a knife. Perhaps a demonstration would loosen your tongue. From the pouch at his belt, he pulls a small, folded scrap of parchment and holds it up for all to see. This, he says loudly now, is a confession. Sign it, girl, and the burden of guilt leaves you. You've been seen sneaking near the manor at night. Gasps ripple through the square, and you feel your chest clench. If Margot signs, she'll be marked as a thief. But if she refuses, Etienne will have an excuse to punish her publicly. Henri steps forward quickly, placing himself between them. That's a lie, he says, his voice firm but measured. We were all in the fields until after dusk. Everyone saw us. Arnaud's sharp gaze narrows his hand, tightening around the parchment, but he says nothing more. Instead, he smiles faintly, tucks the paper back into his belt, and leans closer to Margot, whispering just loud enough for you to hear. Sooner or later, he murmurs, "You'll trip, little bird, and I'll be there to watch you fall." Margot exhales shakily as he walks away, her face pale, her fists clenched so tightly, her knuckles whiten. As the day stretches into evening, Brother Mathieu calls you quietly into the chapel, where the air smells of beeswax and damp stone. A single candle flickers near the altar, its light dancing against the carved wooden saints. I've spoken to no one. He begins, his voice low and heavy, but Etienne suspects me. He knows someone has seen the ledgers. Your stomach twists. What will you do? Mathieu exhales slowly, his fingers tightening around the small leather-bound Bible in his hands. I've made copies proof of his theft. If I reveal them, the bishop may intervene. But if Etienne learns I hold them, the manor will strike before the church ever arrives. Margot shakes her head sharply. Then burn them. It isn't worth the risk. But the priest meets your gaze, his expression unreadable. If I burn them, he wins. Every sack, every coin, every broken family, all of it stays buried. And I cannot carry that sin. For a long moment, silence fills the chapel, broken only by the faint creak of the old wooden rafters. Finally, he reaches into his robe and places a folded scrap of parchment into your hand. Take this, he whispers, a map of the manor's hidden paths. If the riders close in, it may save you. You nod faintly, tucking it into your cloak without a word. That night, after the cottage lights have dimmed, and the riders' patrols drift into the fog, you slip silently from your home meeting, Henri near the edge of the woods. Together you dig into the damp earth of the old charcoal pit, your fingers numb from the cold, your breaths ragged as you lower the sacks into the hollow and cover them with layers of leaves and loose soil. By the time you return, your boots are soaked, your cloak heavy with dew, and your chest aching from the effort. But for the first time in days, you breathe just slightly easier. And yet, as you step back into your cottage, you notice a faint flicker of torchlight on the ridge beyond the fields, riders watching the village from the shadows. They know something. And you realize as you press your back against the door, heart pounding in your chest, that this is no longer about stolen grain. It's about survival now. The next morning dawns sharp and cold, the mist crawling low across the fields like restless ghosts. You wake to the distant clang of the chapel bell, its tone strange, not the soft call to prayer, but harsh, urgent, demanding. By the time you reach the square, half the village is already gathered. Etienne stands at the center on a raised platform, his pale cloak perfectly draped, his boots polished until they gleam even in the weak light. Arnaud waits at his side, leaning lazily against the railing, one hand resting near the hilt of his sword, his scar catching the morning sun like a deliberate mark of menace. The murmur of the villagers fades as Etienne raises one hand. Last night, he begins his voice smooth, but cutting the search turned up nothing. Yet the grain remains missing. His pale eyes sweep the crowd like knives, cold and steady, unblinking. Seigneur Raymond is displeased, he continues. And when our Lord is displeased, punishment is swift. At his gesture, two riders drag a young man forward, Julien, a quiet shepherd from the lower meadow, no older than 19. His hands are bound behind his back, his face pale and drawn. You hear whispers ripple through the crowd, fear threading every syllable. Etienne doesn't look at Julien as he speaks, his voice carrying like steel over stone. This boy was seen near the manor barns 2 nights ago. You know that isn't true. Julien was with Thomas mending fences that night. But no one dares speak. Julien's voice cracks as he tries to protest. I wasn't there. I swear. Arnaud steps forward, cutting him off with a sharp backhand across the face. The crack echoes like a whip through the square, and the crowd flinches as Julien stumbles blood at the corner of his mouth. This is what happens, Arnaud says coldly, to those who betray Seigneur Raymond. Etienne lifts a hand again, silencing him. The boy will be held until someone confesses. Perhaps a few nights in the manor cellar will loosen tongues. Julien is dragged away as his mother cries out, restrained by her neighbors, as she pleads with Etienne to stop. He doesn't so much as glance at her. Your chest aches as you watch. The message is clear: they will punish anyone guilty or not until someone breaks. Beside you, Margot trembles, her hands balled into fists. You grip her wrist, whispering urgently, "Oh, not now." But Arnaud's sharp gaze lands on her anyway, and the faint curl of his lips sends a chill down your spine. After the crowd disperses, Brother Mathieu pulls you and Henri into the shadow of the chapel wall, his breath clouding faintly in the cold air. His face is pale, his gray eyes wide and alert. Etienne knows he whispers, his voice barely audible above the wind. He doesn't have proof yet, but he knows someone helped move the grain. Henri lowers his hood, his voice tight. Then we move it again. Deeper into the woods where even the riders won't follow. Mathieu shakes his head quickly. No. Moving it again risks discovery. You need to be still now, still and silent. Margot joins you, her expression still burning from the square. Stillness won't save us, she hisses softly. They've taken Julien. They'll come for me next. Brother Mathieu glances over his shoulder, lowering his voice even further. Etienne is preparing something bigger. I overheard him speaking with Arnaud last night. He's setting a trap. Your chest tightens. A trap, Mathieu nods grimly. He'll call for another gathering tomorrow. He'll accuse someone outright, forcing the guilty to reveal themselves, or watch an innocent suffer. Margot pales, shaking her head. He'll use Julien. Henri curses under his breath. If he hurts him, the whole village will turn. Mathieu hesitates, his gaze shifting briefly toward the manor. No, he says softly. They won't fight. They're too hungry, too tired. Etienne knows this. That's why he'll keep tightening the rope one knot at a time. The priest runs a hand over his face, the shadows beneath his eyes deepening. I still have the copies of the ledgers, he whispers. But if I use them, Etienne will know it was me. And then, the manor will burn me before the bishop even hears my words. Henri leans closer, his voice low and firm. Then we make our own plan, with or without the church. Mathieu studies him silently for a long moment, then nods faintly, though his expression is heavy with dread. That night, the three of you gather in Henri's small loft above the cooper's shop, the air thick with damp and smoke from the nearby forge. You sit cross-legged on the rough wooden boards, as Henri lays out a crude map, scratched into the dirt, with a broken piece of charcoal. There are 3 paths out of the village, he says, quietly pointing to the lines he's drawn. One runs along the river. It's longer but safer. The other 2 cross the meadow, but if Etienne sets patrols there... Margot interrupts, shaking her head. You want to run. Henri meets her gaze, his voice calm but heavy. I want to survive. You stare down at the rough map, your stomach twisting. The thought of leaving the only home you've ever known, your family, your village, the fields where you've bled and toiled, feels like tearing something out of yourself. But then you think of Julienne's pale face, of your mother's shaking hands, of Arnaud's smirk, and you know Henri's right. We'd need food, you whisper. Clothes. Somewhere to hide until they stop looking. Henri nods. That's why we plan now. If Etienne strikes harder tomorrow, we move before nightfall. Margot exhales, pressing her forehead against her knees. And if he catches us before we can run? Henri hesitates for a moment, before answering, his voice quieter now. Then we don't run alone. We take the ledgers. We give them to someone beyond Raymond's reach. You look at Brother Mathieu's folded map tucked deep into your cloak pocket and realize something you haven't dared think before. There may be no way back from this. Once you step past this line, nothing will ever be the same. Outside the loft, the muffled sound of hooves echoes faintly through the night. You freeze, holding your breath. Henri blows out the candle, plunging you into darkness. Through the crack in the wooden wall, you see them, 2 riders moving silently beneath the pale wash of moonlight torches, unlit. Etienne's men watching the village. Waiting. The next day breaks heavy and gray, the kind of morning where even the crows fall silent. A low mist drifts along the edges of the fields, clinging to the ground like smoke from an unseen fire. The chapel bell rings again, 3 sharp tones, steady and deliberate, summoning the entire village to the square. You walk there slowly, your cloak pulled tight, the weight of dread sinking into your stomach with every step. The crowd gathers in uneasy silence, faces pale and drawn children clinging to their mothers' skirts. Etienne stands on the raised platform at the center, his pale cloak perfectly pressed, his ledger clasped under one arm. Beside him, Arnaud waits, his gloved hands resting casually on the hilt of his sword, his scar catching the faint light. But it's not just the 2 of them today. Behind them stands Julien, the young shepherd, bound and pale, his shirt torn and his lips cracked from thirst. 2 guards grip his arms tightly, forcing him to his knees before the crowd. Gasps ripple softly through the villagers. Etienne raises one hand, his voice calm but cold, carrying easily across the square. You have failed me. He begins, his words deliberate and measured, like each one has been sharpened before leaving his mouth. The grain remains missing, and so, by Seigneur Raymond's command, someone will answer for this theft. His pale eyes sweep the crowd before resting on Julien, kneeling helplessly at his feet. This boy will hang, he says evenly, unless the guilty step forward. The air thickens, pressing against your lungs. You hear someone behind you stifle a sob. A few villagers murmur, pleading softly, but Etienne raises his hand sharply, and the sound dies instantly. Julien shakes his head violently, his hoarse voice breaking. "I didn't do it, please!" Arnaud silences him with a sharp jerk of his arm, forcing his head down. He looks at the crowd, his smirk returning like a knife's edge. "Confess now," he says smoothly, "and your neighbor walks free. Keep your silence, and his blood is on your hands." You feel Margot tense beside you, her fists balled so tightly her nails bite into her palms. You glance at her, pleading silently, but it's too late. Arnaud's gaze has already locked onto her. He steps forward slowly, his boots striking the wet cobblestones with deliberate weight. "You," he says softly, pointing the tip of his riding crop at her chest. "I've seen you near the manor after nightfall. You ask questions. You whisper behind walls." Margot lifts her chin, her jaw trembling but defiant. "And I've seen you torment children for your sport." She spits back, her voice trembling, but loud enough to carry. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Someone pulls their child closer. Arnaud's smirk sharpens into something cruel, and he takes another step closer, towering over her. "Perhaps you'd like to join the boy in the cellar," he murmurs darkly. Henri steps forward, suddenly placing himself between them. "Enough," he says, his voice steady but low. "You've no proof, Arnaud. Threats won't change the truth." Etienne watches the exchange quietly, his fingers tapping slowly against the leather cover of his ledger. Then, without warning, he gestures to the guards. "Search her cottage," he orders flatly. "If we find anything, both she and her family will answer for it." Margot's breath catches, but she doesn't flinch. As the guards leave, Brother Mathieu steps forward from the edge of the crowd, his brown robe trailing across the damp stones. His voice is soft, but carries weight, slicing into the silence. "This is wrong," he says firmly, his gray eyes locking on Etienne's. "You demand truth, but deal only in fear. If Seigneur Raymond's will is just why hide his ledgers from his own people." The crowd stirs uneasily. Etienne's head turns slowly toward him, his pale expression unreadable, but there's a flicker, just a faint shadow of calculation behind his cold gaze. "You tread dangerous ground," Father Etienne says softly, his voice even and smooth. "This is no matter for priests." Brother Mathieu folds his hands in front of him. "When the poor suffer, it is always a matter for priests." Arnaud snorts, stepping toward him. "Careful, Father. Faith does not shield you from the rope." But Mathieu doesn't step back. Instead, his hand slips subtly into his robe, touching the folded copies of Etienne's stolen records, a silent reminder of the one weapon he still holds. Etienne notices the movement, his pale eyes narrowing slightly, but he says nothing. Instead, he speaks to the crowd. "You have until tomorrow's sunset," he declares, his voice carrying clearly, each syllable deliberate. "If no one confesses, the boy dies. And after that, I will choose another." He turns sharply and descends the platform, his cloak swirling behind him as he walks toward his horse. Arnaud lingers a moment longer, his scarred face twisted in a faint, deliberate smile as his gaze sweeps over Margot, then Henri, and finally you. Then he follows Etienne into the mist, the sound of hooves fading slowly until silence settles heavy over the square. The villagers scatter in whispers, leaving only pockets of hushed conversation. Some mutter about turning someone in, anyone to save Julien's life. Others keep their heads down, silent and resigned. Margot grabs your arm and pulls you toward the edge of the square, her breath fast and uneven. "He's forcing us," she hisses. "Either someone speaks or Julien dies." Henri's jaw is tight as he looks between you both. If they search your cottage and find nothing, Arnaud will push harder. He won't stop until someone gives him a name. You press a trembling hand against your chest, feeling the weight of Brother Mathieu's map inside your cloak. Leaving suddenly feels inevitable now, a growing storm at your back. Mathieu joins you a moment later, his robe damp from the fog. He speaks low, almost breathless. Etienne is cornered. That makes him dangerous. We have to be careful, very careful. Henri leans closer, lowering his voice further. If they move Julien to the manor cellar tonight, we have one chance to act. We can free him before they tighten the noose. Margot stares at him, eyes wide. Break into the manor again. After last time, Henri meets her gaze steadily. If we don't, Julien dies. And then someone else will be next. You glance toward the looming shadow of the manor on the hill, torches burning faintly along its walls. The thought of going back there twists your stomach into knots, but deep down you know Henri's right. And as you walk home that evening beneath the heavy silence of the clouds, one thing is clear: this village has crossed a line it cannot return from. Tomorrow blood will fall one way or another. The mist hangs low over the village that night, swallowing the paths in pale silence. No one speaks above a whisper. The air feels heavier than before, as if the earth itself knows what you're about to attempt. Henri waits beneath the old willow at the edge of the fields, his hood pulled low, a small oil lantern flickering faintly between his hands. Margot stands beside him, her cloak drawn tight, her jaw tense. When you approach, Henri's eyes lift to yours, steady, unreadable, but filled with quiet resolve. "This is it," he murmurs, his voice barely louder than the rustling grass. "Julien's being held in the cellar beneath the manor's eastern wing. The guards rotate every half hour. If we're careful, we can slip inside before they change." Margot folds her arms tightly. And if we're wrong, Henri glances toward the manor, its stone walls glowing faintly under torchlight. Then Julien dies tomorrow at sunset, and maybe the rest of us after him. You nod slowly, your heart hammering your throat dry. You want to speak, but your voice won't come. Instead, you clutch Brother Mathieu's map hidden in your cloak pocket, the one showing the secret passages beneath the manor walls. The three of you move in silence along the narrow deer path skirting the fields, staying close to the tree line where shadows run deepest. You can hear the distant sound of revelry, drifting faintly from the manor hall, laughter, clinking goblets, the muffled hum of a lute. While you count scraps of barley, Seigneur Raymond feasts on roasted stag and sweet wine. You reach the eastern wall just as planned. Henri kneels beside the hidden drainage grate, prying it open with a thin iron bar he stole from Thomas's forge. The metal groans softly, but loosens enough for you to slip inside one by one into the dark. The passage beyond smells of damp stone and stagnant water. The air is close, pressing against your lungs as you crawl along the narrow tunnel, your palms scraping the rough walls. Finally, the space opens into a small stone chamber beneath the manor kitchens. From here, Henri gestures silently toward a set of worn wooden stairs leading upward. You follow him, your body tense, every creak beneath your boots loud in your ears. At the top of the stairs, a single door stands ajar, torchlight, spilling faintly from the corridor beyond. You crouch low, listening. Two voices murmur nearby riders on patrol, their tone casual but steady. Henri motions for you to wait, then presses himself flat against the wall, peeking carefully around the frame. When their footsteps fade down the corridor, you slip into the passage, your breath shallow. Margot follows close, her hand brushing yours briefly in silent reassurance. The cellar door is heavier than you expected, bound with iron hinges that groan faintly as Henri eases it open. Inside, the air is damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of mildew and straw. The small chamber is dimly lit by a single torch wedged into the wall, shadows stretching long and strange across the stone floor. Julien is there, bound and slumped against the wall, his wrists raw, his lips pale. When he sees you, his wide eyes glisten with tears. Quiet, Henri whispers urgently, crouching beside him. We're getting you out. Julien tries to speak, but his voice cracks, only a rasp escaping. Margot kneels to help untie the ropes, her fingers quick but trembling. You keep watch near the door, your ears straining for any sound in the hallway above. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Not casual this time, but deliberate. Steady. Getting closer, Arnaud. Henri freezes, holding a finger to his lips. The three of you exchange a silent glance, and in that moment no one breathes. The boots stop just outside the cellar door. For a long, agonizing moment there is nothing but silence. Then the door handle shifts slightly, testing the latch. Henri moves fast, pressing his shoulder against the door to hold it steady, his muscles taut. Your heart pounds so loudly, you're certain he'll hear it through the wood. Finally, the footsteps retreat, slow at first, then fading entirely into silence. You release the breath you didn't know you were holding. But there's no time to waste. Julien stumbles as Henri pulls him to his feet, draping the boy's arm over his shoulder. Go, Henri hisses. Now. You make your way back through the passage beneath the kitchens, but as you pass the storage room, something catches your eye, a faint draft cool against your cheek. You pause, turning to the far wall where the air seems to breathe softly from behind the stone. There's a gap between the shelves, just wide enough to slip through. Elena Margot whispers urgently, "Leave it." But something pushes you forward anyway, curiosity gnawing against caution. You step inside and find yourself in a hidden chamber, lit only by a single flickering oil lamp. On the table at its center lie stacks of parchment and small wooden chests sealed with wax. You approach slowly, scanning the nearest page, ledgers, lists, symbols you recognize instantly. It's proof that Etienne's thefts run deeper than anyone imagined. He's been diverting food grain, even coin meant for the bishopric, far more than Brother Mathieu discovered. You freeze as realization strikes. If you can get this out, you can break Etienne. Elena Henri hisses sharply from the tunnel. Now you grab 2 folded parchments, tucking them deep into your cloak, and hurry back to the group, heart hammering in your chest. The return through the tunnel is frantic. Julien's weight slows you, and every distant creak above sounds like approaching boots. By the time you emerge from the grate into the cool night air, your lungs burn with exhaustion. Henri pulls the grate closed, his hands shaking slightly as he forces it back into place. "Move," he whispers hoarsely, dragging Julien into the shadows beneath the trees. But as you near the cover of the forest, the sound of hooves erupts from the manor yard. Torches flare to life along the walls, and Arnaud's voice cuts through the night low and sharp. Someone's been here. You press yourself into the hollow of a fallen oak, your breath shallow, your body trembling. Julien lies between you and Margot, barely conscious, while Henri peers through the leaves toward the manor. The riders scatter across the grounds, searching their torches, slicing through the mist. For a brief, fragile moment, none look your way. But Arnaud does not move with the others. He turns, scanning the forest's edge slowly, as though he can feel you watching. His torchlight lingers on the shadows where you hide. Then he smiles faintly and walks back toward the manor. That night back in your cottage, you hide the folded parchments beneath the loose floorboard alongside the grain. You know this isn't over. You've crossed another line entirely. The theft was one crime, but now you've stolen his secrets, and Etienne will stop at nothing to find out who. The next morning breaks under a heavy gray sky, the mist rolling low across the damp fields. You wake to silence, not the ordinary stillness of dawn, but a deeper, unnatural quiet. Then the sound comes, hooves on the stone path, slow and deliberate. From the window, you see them, Etienne's riders, circling the village like wolves closing in on trapped prey. Torches burn in their hands, even though the sun has risen, their pale flames flickering against the mist. Before long, Etienne himself arrives, cloak drawn tight against the cold, his expression calm but sharp as glass. He dismounts and steps to the center of the square, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. "Hear me," he says, his voice carrying easily over the hush, steady and unnervingly quiet. "By command of Seigneur Raymond, no one enters or leaves this village without my word." A ripple of alarm passes through the gathered crowd. Someone near you whispers, "A lockdown," and the word spreads like a cold wind. Etienne lets the fear settle before continuing. "The grain will be found. The guilty will be punished. Until then, all paths, all gates, and all roads are under guard. Patrols will remain day and night." You feel Margot stiffen beside you, her hood pulled low, her shoulders tense. Henri, standing just behind, leans closer to whisper, "They know someone's been inside the manor." You glance quickly at him, your pulse hammering. "But how?" He shakes his head. "Doesn't matter. We need to assume they're watching everything now." The riders set up checkpoints at the 3 main paths leading out of the village. Horses snort and paw at the wet soil while guards stand motionless, spears angled toward the ground, eyes sharp beneath their helmets. By midday, everyone has heard the rumor Etienne knows someone saw the ledgers. No one knows how much he knows, only that the steward is hunting quietly now, like a trap waiting to spring. That evening, as the sun sinks into the mist, Arnaud begins his hunt. You see him from a distance first, near the edge of the square, leaning casually against the wooden railing by the well. His torch hangs low in his hand, the flame swaying lazily as his sharp gaze sweeps the villagers one by one. He's patient, watching, waiting for someone to stumble. And then his eyes find Margot. She freezes mid-step, her hand tightening around the basket she carries. For a heartbeat, neither of them moves. Then Arnaud smiles faintly, slow, deliberate, and tips his head as though to mark her. Margot's breath hitches, and she turns quickly down the narrow path behind the tannery, disappearing into the fog. Henri curses softly under his breath. "He's circling her," he mutters. He knows she's close to this somehow. You shake your head quickly. If he corners her, she'll fight back. And that's what he wants. Henri's jaw tightens. Then we don't let her be alone. Later that night, you find Margot sitting beneath the old willow, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The soft wind tugs at her hood, pulling strands of loose hair across her pale face. She doesn't look at you as you sit beside her, your fingers digging absently into the damp earth. "He'll come for me," she says softly, her voice steady but hollow. "Arnaud. He's waiting for the chance. You want to tell her she's wrong, but you can't. Instead, you place a hand gently over hers. Then we stay close," you whisper. "We don't give him the chance." Henri joins you a moment later, crouching low in the shadows. His voice is barely audible. We have another problem, he says. I saw Etienne near the manor gate tonight. He was speaking with two riders. About a trap. You glance at him sharply. What kind of trap? Henri hesitates, scanning the path behind you before leaning closer. He wants the ledgers back. He knows someone took something, so he's going to find planted evidence and force the thief to reveal themselves. Your throat tightens. And if no one speaks, Henri's jaw clenches. Then he'll burn a cottage, make an example. You glance toward the distant torches of the manor, the orange glow like watchful eyes against the pale mist. Inside your cloak, you can feel the parchments pressed against your ribs, heavier than any sack of grain. You could end this now. If you gave them back, Etienne would likely stop hunting. Julienne would live. Margot would be safe. But handing them over means the truth dies in the dark forever. Etienne's thefts buried the villagers' suffering erased, and Raymond's feast continuing while families starve. And deep inside, you know Etienne won't stop even if you surrender them. That night, you sit cross-legged on the floor of your cottage, the flickering firelight casting trembling shadows against the walls. The hidden parchments rest in your lap, the ink smudged in places from where your palms sweat against the rough paper. Brother Mathieu arrives quietly, slipping through the door with his hood drawn. His voice is hushed, urgent. They know he whispers immediately, his gaze sharp. Etienne suspects someone has seen the records. You have to be careful. You glance at him, your voice low and tight. How long do we have? Not long, Mathieu replies. He'll make his move before the week's end. Margot leans against the wall, her arms folded tightly. Then we leave, she says suddenly, her voice sharper than you've ever heard it. Tonight. Take what we can carry, get past the riders, and disappear before Etienne locks us down completely. Henri shakes his head. We won't make it far. They'll hunt us, Margot. There are patrols on every path, and Arnaud knows the forest better than we do. Mathieu leans forward, lowering his voice. The only safety now is leverage, he says. Keep the parchments hidden, but hold them close. They're your shield, the one thing Etienne can't afford exposed. You nod faintly, though your chest tightens at the thought. If the parchments are discovered, it's not just you who will pay. It's everyone around you. As the fire burns low and silence settles over the cottage, you hear the distant sound of hooves again, muffled through the damp earth. A torchlight glows faintly beyond the fields, moving slowly along the ridge. They're still watching. And you realize as you curl beneath the thin wool blanket that the walls of this village are no longer home. They're a cage. The chapel bell rings at noon, its sharp, hollow toll cutting through the cold air like a blade. From every corner of the village, people gather in the square, drawn by summons they dare not ignore. The crowd is tense and silent, a sea of pale faces beneath heavy cloaks, the mist curling around their boots. You stand with Margot and Henri at the edge of the square, your hood low, the parchments hidden deep beneath your cloak pressed against your ribs like a second heartbeat. Etienne waits on the raised platform, pale as bone, his fur-lined cloak resting perfectly on his shoulders. Beside him, Arnaud leans against the railing, his arms crossed, a faint smile playing at the corner of his scarred mouth. When the murmurs fade, Etienne begins, his voice low and deliberate. The grain remains missing, he says, his words precise, each one weighted and sharp. And now, Seigneur Raymond demands answers. Last night, we found Trace's footprints leading from the manor barns into the woods. The crowd stirs uneasily. You feel Henri tense beside you, his fists curling at his sides. Etienne lets the whispers build for a moment before raising his hand. Whoever has stolen from the Lord has stolen from us all, he continues coldly. And so today, the guilty will reveal themselves, or the innocent will suffer. Arnaud steps forward, tossing a folded scrap of parchment into the dirt before the platform. Last night, he announces loudly, this was found near the outer wall. Gasps ripple through the villagers as the guards display a burlap sack, small tied, and bearing a chalk mark. You recognize it instantly. It's the symbol from the stolen parchments you took from the hidden chamber. They planted this, Henri mutters under his breath, his jaw tight. They're forcing a confession. Etienne's pale gaze sweeps the crowd, slowly lingering briefly on Margot, before shifting away too casual to be chance. Then Arnaud speaks, his tone mockingly soft. Perhaps someone among us knows more than they pretend. Someone with restless eyes. Someone who cannot keep their hands, or their thoughts, still. Margot stiffens beside you. You grip her wrist silently, begging her to stay quiet, but Arnaud has already locked onto her like a wolf scenting blood. You, he says, stepping down from the platform, his boots sinking into the wet earth as he moves toward her. I saw you near the tannery 3 nights ago. You disappeared into the fog when I called. Margot straightens her spine, her jaw clenched. Because you follow me like a shadow, she spits, her voice sharp but shaking. Because you watch me as if I've already been condemned. Gasps ripple through the square again, but Margot doesn't flinch. Her defiance is dangerous and beautiful. Arnaud leans close, his voice low enough only you, Margot, and Henri can hear. Careful little bird, he murmurs, the torchlight glinting off his scar. One word from me and Etienne will take more than your pride. Henri steps forward, suddenly placing himself between them. Leave her, he says flatly. If you have accusations, speak them to everyone. Arnaud smirks, faintly, glancing back at Etienne, who watches silently from the platform, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of his ledger. The tension coils tighter, every breath in the square heavy and sharp. Before anything can erupt, Brother Mathieu steps forward, his brown robe brushing the damp stones. His voice is steady but soft, carrying just enough to reach the edges of the crowd. Enough, he says calmly, his gray eyes meeting Etienne's. This spectacle helps no one. You hold the power to end this without blood. Etienne tilts his head slightly, almost amused. Do you presume to instruct me? Father Mathieu folds his hands calmly in front of him. I presume only to remind you that the Lord sees all, and if there is justice in this matter, it will be revealed without torment. Arnaud scoffs. Spare us the sermons, priest. But Etienne doesn't answer immediately. His pale gaze lingers on Mathieu for a heartbeat too long, a flicker of calculation behind the stillness before he finally speaks. You have until tomorrow's dusk, he announces, his voice suddenly sharp. If no one steps forward, we begin burning cottages, one by one. The crowd gasps collectively. A few women cover their mouths. A man near you drops to his knees, his hand clutched over his face. Etienne turns away, without another word, mounting his horse with practiced grace. Arnaud follows, but not before locking eyes with Margot one last time, his faint smirk returning, as if to promise soon. The riders leave the square, their torches vanishing into the pale mist, but the silence they leave behind is louder than any scream. That night, the cottage feels smaller, the walls pressing close around you, as if trying to contain the weight of what you carry. Henri paces the narrow floor, his jaw tight, while Margot sits motionless by the window, staring into the dark beyond the trees. Brother Mathieu slips inside quietly, his hood pulled low. He leans close to the small table where the single candle burns, his voice low and urgent. I've been to the woods, he whispers. I found a messenger heading toward Angers. Etienne's sending the ledgers to Raymond tomorrow. The falsified ones, the ones hiding his thefts. Your stomach drops. And if Raymond accepts them, then he gains the Lord's full protection, Mathieu says grimly. After that, no one can touch him, not even the bishop. Margot exhales sharply, rubbing at her temples. Then we're trapped. There's no way out. But Mathieu shakes his head. There is one way. He looks directly at you, his gaze steady. The parchments. The real records you found. They're the only leverage left. If we send them first to someone Raymond trusts, Etienne loses his shield. Henri glances at you, his brow furrowed. And if we're caught carrying them, Mathieu's silence is answer enough. The candlelight flickers, painting sharp shadows against the cottage walls. Outside, a distant owl calls into the stillness, its sound lonely and cold. Finally, you speak your voice, quiet but steady. Then we send them tonight. Margot turns sharply toward you. Through the patrols, through Arnaud. Your hands tremble slightly, but you nod. If we wait until tomorrow, Etienne wins. And if he wins, the village will starve. For a long moment, no one speaks. Then Henri exhales slowly and nods once the faintest sign of agreement. Mathieu reaches across the table, placing his hand lightly over yours. Then we move before the first light, he says softly. Quiet, fast, together. And in that quiet, beneath the trembling candlelight, the choice takes root, one path forward, dangerous and fragile, holding everything on the edge of a knife. The night is colder than any before, the kind of cold that feels alive, breathing against your skin like a silent warning. A thin veil of mist coils low over the fields, pale beneath the silver moonlight. You stand beneath the willow with Henri Margot and Brother Mathieu. The stolen parchments rest beneath your cloak, their edges damp from nervous hands. Henri scans the shadows constantly, his jaw clenched tight, while Margot fidgets with the ties of her hood, her breath curling white in the chill. Brother Mathieu kneels briefly in the damp grass, whispering a short prayer before he rises. The riders switch patrols every half hour, he murmurs softly. We take the southern path along the riverbank. It's longer, but the mist will cover us. Henri nods, pulling his hood lower. We keep to the trees. No noise, no fire. You move quickly and silently through the narrow deer path that winds toward the river. The wet earth clings to your boots, and the sound of rushing water grows louder as you draw near the dark edge of the bank. Somewhere deep in the woods, an owl calls soft and low, its note stretching into the night. The plan is simple. Slip past the patrols, follow the river south, and deliver the parchments to the messenger waiting beyond the old mill road, a single chance to send the truth into the wider world before Etienne locks it away forever. But nothing tonight is simple, because Arnaud knows. It begins with the soft crunch of boots on damp leaves, faint, but too close. Henri freezes, holding a hand out to stop you. You hear the distant jingle of chainmail, the low creak of leather, and then a torchlight flares suddenly through the mist ahead. Arnaud steps from the shadows, his scar catching the pale light, his smirk sharp and cold. Two riders flank him, their torches burning low. Well, he says softly, his voice carrying easily over the hush. Out for a walk. Henri squares his shoulders, stepping slightly in front of you. Move aside, Arnaud. The rider tilts his head, amused, and missed the chance to learn what's hidden under that cloak. His gaze drops to the folds of your garment, lingering just a moment too long, and you feel the parchments like fire against your ribs. Margot moves closer, her voice low and steady, despite the tension trembling beneath it. You don't want to do this. Arnaud laughs softly, not mockery, but something darker. Don't I? Etienne wants his thief, and I intend to bring him one. Henri's hand closes around the hilt of the small knife hidden beneath his tunic. His voice drops quiet, but hard. Then you'll have to try. For a moment, the silence between them sharpens tight as a drawn bowstring. But before anyone moves, Brother Mathieu steps forward. His hands raised, his voice calm and steady. Listen to me, he says softly, looking directly at Arnaud. Walk away. Arnaud turns his head, the smirk fading slightly. Or what priest Mathieu's gray eyes are steady as he speaks. You've spent years doing Etienne's bidding, but this isn't about loyalty. This is about truth. If you hand us over the ledgers, go to the bishop. Etienne burns with them. The riders glance at one another, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Arnaud studies Mathieu in silence, the torchlight painting sharp shadows across his scarred cheek. Finally, he speaks softly, low enough only you can hear. Run. You don't question it. Henri pulls you into the tree line, Margot close behind, the cold air tearing at your lungs as you sprint down the narrow path. Behind you, you hear Arnaud shouting, not at you, but at his riders, ordering them to circle north away from the riverbank. The path to the river feels endless, every step sinking into damp earth, but when the dark line of the old mill road finally appears, you see the small silhouette waiting beneath the leaning oak, the messenger. A young woman, her cloak heavy with dew, steps forward quickly. Without speaking, you press the folded parchments into her hands. Her fingers close over them, and she nods once before disappearing into the mist, heading south along the river's edge. The weight you've carried for days is suddenly gone. But relief is short-lived, because the sound of hooves erupts behind you. You turn sharply to see Etienne himself riding hard along the path, 3 guards at his back, their torches cutting through the mist like blades. Henri pulls you aside, shouting for Margot to run, but the riders are too fast. Etienne reins his horse sharply, his pale face carved from stone, his voice slicing through the cold. Where is it, he demands. The ledgers, the truth you think you've hidden. Brother Mathieu steps forward, placing himself between Etienne and the rest of you, his voice quiet but firm. You've stolen from these people. You've lied to Seigneur Raymond, and now the proof rides south. Etienne's expression barely shifts, but his voice drops cold as the river itself. Then none of you will leave this village alive. The guards move to dismount, but then the soft, distant toll of the chapel bell rings out through the mist, slow and deliberate. 3 times. Henri blinks, startled. What is that? Brother Mathieu smiles faintly, his hands clasped in front of him. That he says softly is the signal. From the shadows beyond the ridge you hear it, voices rising, dozens of them, villagers stepping from the darkness, carrying torches, tools, and staves. Thomas, Beatrice, her children, even the frail elders from the lower cottages, all of them. For the first time, the villagers are not silent. Etienne looks around sharply, realizing too late that the control he's held so tightly has begun to slip through his fingers. He yanks on the reins, shouting for his guards, but they hesitate, unnerved by the sudden shift in numbers. Arnaud appears at the far side of the clearing. His torch lowered, his expression unreadable. He doesn't move to help Etienne. Instead, he turns his horse and rides slowly into the mist, disappearing without a word. Etienne stares after him, his knuckles white around the reins, but the choice is already made for him. With the proof gone and the villagers united, his power fractures. Finally, he lowers his hand, his voice tight with barely contained fury. This isn't over. Then he turns his horse sharply, and rides back toward the manor, his guards following their torches, dwindling into the pale night. You stand there beneath the leaning oak, your chest heaving the cold, damp air sharp against your lungs. Henri places a hand on your shoulder, steadying you. Margot exhales slowly, leaning against a tree, her hands trembling but unbroken. Brother Mathieu lowers his hood, his voice soft but certain. Tonight you gave the truth a chance to live. For the first time in many days, the silence around you feels lighter, freer, as though the mist itself has begun to lift. But deep inside you know the story isn't finished. Etienne will return. Seigneur Raymond's wrath may follow. The winter ahead will still be long, and hunger will not vanish overnight. And yet for now the village breathes again, together. The night has grown quiet again. The mist drifts softly across the fields, low and pale beneath the silver moonlight. The faint rustle of leaves stirs in the cool breeze, and the river carries its quiet song beneath the old mill road. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls its voice, stretching gently into the dark. Inside your small cottage, the fire has burned low, glowing faintly against the worn stone walls. The faint warmth lingers in the air, wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. You sit beside the wooden bed frame, watching the embers fade to soft gold as the shadows dance gently across the ceiling. Henri sleeps soundly now, his breathing slow and steady. Margot lies curled on her side, her hand resting loosely over her chest, her soft breaths blending with the stillness. Brother Mathieu kneels by the shuttered window, his head bowed, the quiet rise and fall of his shoulders, the only sign he is still awake. Beyond these walls, the village rests at last. No riders, no torches in the mist. Just silence, deep and forgiving, stretching across the empty fields beneath the star-washed sky. Tomorrow the work will return. The grain will still be scarce. Winter will still be long. But for now there is peace, fragile, fleeting, but real. You close your eyes slowly, letting the quiet seep into you, letting the steady rhythm of breath and silence carry you deeper. The troubles of the day drift further and further away like ripples disappearing on a still pond. And as you surrender to the softness of the night, the story fades, leaving only quiet dreams.